Houston, we have a podcast. You're listening to the premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
All right, it's the H-Town Hoops podcast. Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane here. Austin Mendez is producing this thing for us behind the scenes. And the last time we talked to you guys, there were 2 games left in the season. Those games have been completed. And more importantly, though, the news of the day and the news of the moment is the Stephen Silas firing, or the non-renewal of the contract, or however exactly you want to put it. But obviously, Stephen Silas will not be back. That is the news of the day. We anticipated this. We have been anticipating this for a while. There are even reports out there, Adam, that and I think we've heard this before, but there are reports out there that there have been other moments where Stephen Silas's job has been in jeopardy. And so just the fact that, he didn't have any more guaranteed years left on this contract, this is the end of the contract, makes it not all that surprising given how things have gone. But want to get your initial reactions to the news of Stephen Silas's firing and what this exactly means for the Rockets, aside from the fact that they'll have a new coach.
It's not a surprise at all. Obviously, we knew this was coming. We've known, like you said, we've known this has been coming really for months. Really, you can even go back to the start of the season when Stephen Silas had an option on his contract for next year. If the Rockets were like seriously interested in having him be the head coach for the future, that option would have been picked up, because it's not like anything that happened this season was a surprise. They knew they were not going to win basketball games, and so for them to do this today, this was to be expected. We'll get into a lot of it, I'm sure, as this show goes on. But no, I was a little surprised that it started to leak as the final buzzer in Washington sounded. I thought maybe we would get a couple hours, but it made for kind of an awkward, I wasn't there, but just watching his post-game press conference after the game on Sunday, that made for kind of a rough watch, just because the people in that room knew what the deal was. I'm sure he knew that reports had already started to trickle in. So it's unfortunate that it kind of happened that way, but we all knew it was going to happen.
Well, to be fair, though, also, Adam, he had addressed this himself kind of head on. I wouldn't say like by specifically saying, hey, I know I won't be back, but the entire tone of the pregame press conference of the last home game of the season, I believe it was last week, was basically centered around that. The idea that, hey, this is the end of the contract and we haven't really talked about me coming back, which, is normally the writing on the wall. So it did seem like we had sort of this, or at least that he had an idea, like he wasn't, it's not like we think that he was blindsided by it or anything like that. The timing of it and the sort of the optics of it is probably its own thing, though. And I wonder how much of that is just ambition, everybody knowing what's going to happen and then just wanting to kind of be in front of everything.
Yeah, but it's still your job until somebody tells you it's not your job.
Yeah.
And I imagine that he would like to have been told by Rafael Stone or by the Fertittas before it had been leaked to basically every major news outlet in the country. So
because also along with the news, right, Adam, along with the news is that, like, not just leaking that he won't be back, but they'll also be meeting on Monday to
which
tell
he
him.
said.
Yeah. But we're reporting and telling this to you on Sunday. So I definitely get it, even though we all kind of understand that this is what the situation is. But yeah, I just wanted to make the point about Stephen Silas. Like, I think you and I were talking about this at the studios, at the SportsRadio 610 studios the other day. Like, it's kind of unfortunate for Stephen Silas, even though I don't think that he, like, I think it's fair to say that he underperformed in this job, but I don't know. I don't really know how you could have succeeded in a situation like this necessarily. I don't come away from this thinking that, Stephen Silas is a bad coach. And I do acknowledge that he ended up in a very difficult and, I would say, different situation from the one that he signed up for, which is, I think, to coach James Harden and Russell Westbrook. But he also didn't really seem to maximize what they really had, or maybe, if that's not the better way to put it, I would say maybe really capture the team's attention with like a vision and a purpose. They just, so oftentimes it seemed like this was a team that played aimlessly. And I would say that when a team looks and plays like it's poorly coached, you don't get to absolve the coach, even if the situation is not entirely the coach's fault. And so that's one of the hard parts about coaching, and I think that's something that Stephen Silas ran into here. Is even though he's going to leave here with his reputation intact, and that people around the league are still gonna respect him, I think this is one of those situations where it was just really kind of hard to succeed, and he also wasn't really the right fit.
He coached the way I think he thought that you should best run an NBA team, and that's to play free flowing, let the players kind of run the show, and you help out where you need to, because that's what the NBA is. The NBA is about the players. It's not about the coaches. You can't overcoach in the NBA. This isn't college where the coaches are calling a set every single time down the floor and they're calling a million timeouts at the end of games. And they're subbing guys in and out every 30 seconds. That's not how the NBA works. You let guys play, you let them play to their best abilities. And I remember when he first got the job, I think this was in the preseason of his first year. Somebody asked him, like, are you the type of coach, do you call a lot of plays or do you just let guys kind of go? And his answer to that was, if I'm calling plays, it means we're not playing the right way. It means that we're getting bogged down and I'm having to bail us out with play calls. And so that was his whole thing. If you see guys looking over towards the sideline when we're on offense, that means things aren't going well. Now, for a veteran team, I think that works 100%. When it's James Harden running your offense, that works. I do think that a younger group, especially a group that really didn't have a point guard, like you could run that type of an offense with John Wall. But when you have a group that really doesn't have a point guard who has played the position before, you probably need to be a little bit more hands-on and you probably need to be a little bit more controlling. But I do think that he coached the way that he felt like you needed to coach. And I think that in a sense, he felt like he was setting these young guys up for success in the future by basically saying, hey, I'm taking the training wheels off, throw on a helmet and ride the bike. I think that's kind of what he aimed for. Did it work? This season, did it turn into a good offense? No, it turned into one of the worst offenses in the league over the last couple of years. But that's the way that he went at it. And I think when you get one of these jobs, you have to do it your way. You have to be true to yourself, because if you try to be someone else, then the players see right through it. If you try to coach a different way than the way you were brought up or the way that you believe in, then you leave the job having all sorts of regrets because you did not do it your way. So I think that as Stephen Silas looks back on his time as the Rockets head coach, he can say, I did it my way. It didn't work out, but you know what? I did it the way that I felt it should have been done. I have no regrets for that. If I ever get the opportunity to do it again, I would do it the exact same way. And I have a great deal of respect for that.
Yeah, and I think that, or at least I want to acknowledge that it feels like a conflict here, or a clash of intentions when you have a coach who has the stated philosophy or approach that you just described, but then within that, right as you're starting that, you go into it with an experiment at point guard. And I don't want to, this is not to disparage Kevin Porter Jr., who we have said multiple times on this podcast has been their best player this year. This is not a shot at Kevin Porter Jr., but imagine the difficulty in wanting your coaching style to be free flowing, but then you have a first-time point guard or first-time NBA point guard that is supposed to be managing plays for you or managing the offense for you. Like those things just, to me, do not mesh. They conflict. And I feel like the team was reflective of that, of not having a lot of, or at least not always having a lot of direction and vision. You had a coach whose approach was the way you just described it, wanting the players to kind of figure things out and to play things out, but also a team that lacked a natural playmaking point guard and somebody, and not just the point guard part, but also just young players overall. Like, everybody out there is young and not knowing what to do. So I feel like it was a tough situation to begin with. Do you think, Adam, that there's anything that Silas could have done to have saved his job? And we're only going through this now because it's, we're going to move on eventually and talk about the future. But just while we're on it, is there anything that he could have done in a situation like this to have saved his job? Or was this sort of transition, whoever the coach was going to be, kind of seemed like maybe set up to fail?
No, I don't think so. I've kind of wondered that myself. They knew what they were going to be. And when you have Rafael Stone telling people within the organization that it's a miracle if we get to 25 wins this year, then what's the coach supposed to do? Like if he gets to 26 wins, are we throwing him a parade in extending the contract at that point? Everything I know, it sounded like they started off the season 2-12, but I don't think as an organization they were disappointed by the 2-12 because they started. It was such a brutal schedule to start the year where they're starting. I think they played 10 of their first 13 games on the road. They were playing against really good teams to start. I mean, that's impossible for a group that's this young to succeed under those circumstances. So they start the year 2-12, but then they had that really good stretch right around Thanksgiving where they beat Atlanta and Oklahoma City on a back-to-back. They beat Phoenix a couple of times. They beat the Sixers.
It was
They
around
beat
the time. It was around the time we started the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're sitting at 9-18. They're starting at 9-18 in the middle of December, and they'd actually won I think it was like 8 of 20 games, which again, not great. You're not hanging banners for that, but when you consider where this team has been, that's pretty damn good. But then there was the stretch, middle of December, really up until the All-Star break, where they just piled up losses. And so I'm trying to do this math in my head, which never goes well. They were 9-18 after beating Phoenix on December 13th. They basically, from that point until March 4th, when they won that back-to-back against Memphis, they were 13-49. So I just said 9-18. They were 13-49. So that's what, 4-31. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So they won 4 out of 35 games from that point on. And so that was it from there. And I think that by that point, I know he had lost Tillman Fertitta. I think Tillman Fertitta was probably done with Silas long ago, but they just let him kind of hang on the rest of the season. I don't think they thought, we've talked about this, I don't think they thought there was any point to making a coaching change during the season. So that stretch, that 4-35 stretch from the middle of December through the end of February is basically where I think that if he was going to save his job, they would have had a little bit more success during that stretch, but that basically sealed his fate. Though I do think that they had kind of decided long ago that he was not going to be the coach for them moving forward.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that's pretty clear. I know the story they published in The Athletic today mentioned that, they, by the time, we all remember that his father passed in December. By the time that had happened, it seemed like they had decided that they were going to keep him throughout the season, or at least that's according to The Athletic earlier on Sunday in a report. But I just feel like there's nothing that, it was always going to be that this was going to be kind of the fall guy, maybe, if that's the right way to put it.
Somebody had to take the hit.
Yeah, somebody had to
lose. They lost 60 games in back-to-back seasons. Had they played 82 games that first year, they would have lost 60 games then too. So, you can't just bring the whole brain trust back after losing, essentially having 3 straight 60 loss seasons. That's how it is. That's the business.
Yeah. And never mind the fact that, I mentioned the whole point guard thing about Kevin Porter Jr., but also pointing out it's not just you got a guy trying to learn how to play point guard, but you got a lot of players, and we've mentioned this before, young players trying to learn how to play in the NBA just in general. But then they were without said point guard and their best player for 20 games throughout the year. It just seems like a really, really bad deal. I honestly wonder if I could inject truth serum into Stephen Silas just for a moment, just to know, hey, are you actually relieved? There's got to be a great deal of relief, even though there's probably some level of, and I know he said he was proud of everything whenever he talked to the media, but there's got to be some level of, wishing that this did not go this way exactly. But I also wonder if he's relieved to not have to, since he is the fall guy, to not have to deal with the fall anymore now that it's over. But I also find, I don't think there's anything he could have done to save his job, Adam, but I also find it a little bit, I don't know if ironic is the right word that I'm looking for, but interesting at least that, the team that they're looking to become very soon is a team that he probably could coach a lot better. Like one that's let's take, dream hypothetical for Rockets fan. Let's just dream for a second here. Let's say they get Victor Wembanyama or even Scoot. Let's say they get a guy that you really like. Name that guy, whoever you are, fan, and fantasize for a second. Let's say they get that guy, and Jalen Green is in year 3. Jabari Smith is in year 2. Alfred Şengün is in year 3. Kevin Porter Jr. Has evolved and developed as a player. And you insert Stephen Silas into a situation like that, and I feel like he does a lot better. I feel like the one that he could potentially have gotten or have been in this coming year is one that he would have potential and thriving in. It's just something that we obviously will never know and won't get the answer to. But it's funny to me that the job that he probably is more cut out for is the one that's about to open up.
Well, that's why I think that he is probably not relieved, and I think that he's probably incredibly disappointed as he,
Okay.
sits here on this Sunday night, because I do think that and you could see it towards the end of the year. I mean, you could see just the talent, and he had to do the real heavy lifting of trying to nurse this group through, and he doesn't get to see the other side of it. And so I think that whoever steps into this job is walking into what is a pretty good job, and you're walking into a great deal of talent. That's already on the roster. You're walking into a team that has $60 million in cap space. You're walking into a team that has a 50-50 chance of landing a top 4 pick in the draft. I mean, that's a really good job. And so I think that he is probably really bummed out because this was his chance. And I think that had he been given another year, another 2 years, then you're looking at a completely different situation. If he would not have taken this job, let's say he stays in Dallas, or let's say he just stays in the assistant role with another team and this job becomes open. Let me tell you something. Who's the first guy that's probably getting interviewed for this job? It's probably Stephen Silas. And now all of a sudden this job looks a whole lot better today than it did when he first took it. So I mean, it's life is so much about timing. He got the timing wrong on this one. He was a finalist for the Rockets job when they hired Mike D'Antoni. Had he taken over as James Harden is in the middle of his prime and happy in Houston, and they had all that cap space, and his career might look a whole lot different than it does today. So I mean, timing really is everything.
All right, man. You named a couple of possible candidates, potential candidates for Stephen Silas's replacement as the Rockets' head coach. You mentioned that the Rockets plan to swing for a big name, and the names that you mentioned were Nick Nurse, who we all know obviously won a championship with the Toronto Raptors. If he becomes available, somebody that they could be interested in. Kenny Atkinson, of course, used to coach the Brooklyn Nets several years ago. And you mentioned Frank Vogel, recently won a championship with the Los Angeles Lakers, used to coach the Indiana Pacers a while ago, and Ime Udoka, formerly of the formerly of the Boston Celtics, as we know, but also a really good and acclaimed assistant coach with the Brooklyn Nets. There's some other stuff going on there that I don't know exactly how that factors in, but he's obviously in the market. And Scott Brooks of Rockets fame, Scott Brooks, but former OKC Thunder coach, and what is he? Portland Trailblazers assistant
in Portland now. He's with Washington.
Where's he now? Portland now, but also coach Washington, coached OKC. So those are the potential Silas replacements. Handicap these things. What are you hearing? What do you think about potential fits? What's your initial read on sort of the coaching pool, candidacy pool we got here?
So it sounds like Udoka and Atkinson are probably unlikely. I think the Rockets would like them, but I don't think either one seems to be all that likely. I think Udoka might have his eyes set on another job if it were to become open. And then Atkinson seems to be very happy in Golden State. His family really likes it out there. And remember, he was hired initially by the Hornets last spring, and then he walked away from that job right after the Warriors won the championship. So it sounds like, and it kind of feels like he's almost waiting out Steve Kerr to step down. And let's keep this in mind with the Warriors. Their GM, Bob Myers, does not have a contract for next season. Again, it seems like if he were going to stay there as the GM of the Warriors, he would have a new contract by this point. So he could go anywhere in this offseason. And if he does, maybe Steve Kerr decides to step down from coaching, move into the front office. Remember, he ran basketball ops for the Phoenix Suns about 10, 15 years ago. And then maybe Atkinson just slides over into that head coach role. So maybe that's what he's waiting for. So it seems like those two are probably not likely to get the Rockets job. We'll see about Nurse. if he leaves Toronto, the one thing with Nurse, he's making more than $8 million a year, and he's going to want to get paid if he leaves that job to go take another one. And we'll have to wait and see if the Rockets are interested in paying that sort of a price tag. So that kind of leaves you with Vogel, and it leaves you with Brooks. Vogel is a guy, and I've always thought this. I've always thought that Tillman Fertitta wants to go into a press conference hiring a head coach and be able to say the words, "We have a championship head coach." And that's what Frank Vogel is. There are not a whole lot of those that are out there, especially guys that are out there on the market. Vogel would be a guy that you can say this guy has won a championship as an NBA head coach. The Rockets, Mike D'Antoni didn't have that. Stephen Silas didn't have that. Jeff Van Gundy did not have that years ago. Same with Rick Adelman, if you want to go back further. So that's one of those things where I think that if you're Tillman and they want to be better defensively, obviously, Frank Vogel's teams have always been good defensively. And then there's Brooks. Brooks is the interesting one, and that's the name that really started to emerge just in the last few days. And what's interesting about Brooks is, and I know the track record recently has not been great, did not have a great finish in Oklahoma City. They had mixed results in Washington. Some of that was more circumstance with that team just getting old and getting injured. But where did Scott Brooks really make his name as a head coach? It was in Oklahoma City, and it was essentially around the same time, the same timeline that the Thunder were on is what the Rockets are in right now. And Brooks took over essentially. You had the first year of Kevin Durant. That was with PJ Carlesimo as the then Sonics head coach. Carlesimo went with them to Oklahoma City. They draft Russell Westbrook, so they have 2 top 3, top 4 picks. And then Carlesimo didn't even make it, to Christmas of that second year. Brooks took over. They had a nice run towards the end of that season. They finished with the 3rd pick. They draft James Harden, and then a couple years later, they're in the finals. So that's kind of the trajectory that Oklahoma City was on. And listen, it's taking a big leap to put the Rockets in that same mix. I don't know if anyone believes they have a Kevin Durant or a Russell Westbrook on the roster at this point, but that's kind of the trajectory that you can take with the Rockets. And Scott Brooks is a head coach. He's experienced that. He understands how you build an organization really from the bottom up. So that's why you can kind of, say that Scott Brooks would make some sense with where they're at.
Well, they don't have a Kevin Durant and they don't have a Russell Westbrook, but they are going to be pursuing a James Harden. And you mentioned the overlap. Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned the overlap. There is at least a relation, some sort of working relationship and knowledge of each other, right? The previous working relationship, obviously he coached them, right? So there is that to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. And you're looking for stability. Like that's what you're looking for with this group right now is you're looking for stability. You're looking for some sort of a stable influence. And it feels like, and Brooks has been that guy in the past. Is Scott Brooks a great head coach? Is Scott Brooks a championship level head coach? Probably not. But the Rockets aren't really looking for a championship level head coach. They're just looking to be competitive. They're not looking to win 60 games and win, 16 playoff games. They're looking to just get into the playoffs and maybe win 40 games in a year because it's been a while since that's happened.
All right. Speaking of former Rockets who are coaches and James Harden for that matter, you threw this out there, Sam Cassell, and I think a lot of people with Houston ties and that are familiar with Rockets history and familiar with Sam Cassell's journey as a coach as well could look at this and see how it could also make sense as somewhat of a dark horse or at least something that, deserves a look. You mentioned you mentioned Sam Cassell on Twitter, and this. I think it's just a good conversation piece. What do you think of that as an idea, as a fit, as a possibility? What's your read on it?
When you make one coaching change, you usually are looking for someone who's kind of the opposite of the last guy. And so the Rockets hired somebody without any head coaching experience the last time around with Silas. So I find it somewhat unlikely that they would look to hire someone without head coach experience again. But they did interview Cassell the last time around. And that's one of the things that I always tend to look at is, all right, who did you interview the last time? Because a lot of times you can go back to that guy. And we just saw it with the Rockets where Stephen Silas was a finalist when they hired Mike D'Antoni. They just went back to Silas the next time. So you kind of look at the list of guys that they interviewed, and Cassell was on that list. Cassell's been an assistant now for a really long time. He's worked under Doc Rivers for probably almost a decade, and he's done it at multiple stops. He coached under him in LA. He's now coaching under him in Philly. he kind of molds the past and the future with the Rockets, having been, part of the 2 championship teams, having now been away. He's been away from the organization now for almost 30 years. He got traded I guess it's now, 25 years. He got traded in 1996.
Yeah,
That's how
it's as I say, it's approaching 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a minute, but again, he has that history. He's paid his dues as an assistant coach, which I do think matters. And he's got some sort of, I don't know how strong the relationship is with James Harden, but those two having worked together now for a season and a half, that might matter as well. So if you were going to hire a first time head coach in this cycle, if you're the Rockets, then Cassell would be that type of a guy.
Yeah, obviously everything you just mentioned, but I would just say, like, the James Harden thing is just on top of it. I feel like Sam Cassell could coach these guys. Like, I do feel like he could get their attention, that he could, and you talk about helping a young point guard and Kevin Porter Jr., or if they were to draft one, if they were to draft somebody like Scoot, and even a Victor, like any young player, I feel like could benefit from being around Sam Cassell. And I'm not going to pretend to know Sam Cassell very well, but I can remember being around him as a little kid at the Fondy Rec Center in Houston. And he just seemed to always have a way with people, always have sort of a presence about him. And I don't know if it translates to necessarily to NBA head coach. As you mentioned, he's had a long history now as an assistant coach, but to me, he feels like the person that has the right background, the right working level of knowledge of the game, on top of sort of the right temperament to deal with a young team. I feel like, and I'm not campaigning for them to coach Sam Cassell, but the bit that I know about him feels like he's a good personality fit on top of the qualifications on it. So to me, he's an interesting name for those reasons.
He's someone that I'm at least interviewing. He was an assistant in Washington for 4 seasons, and from 2014 through today, he's been, he's worked under Doc Rivers. That's, Doc Rivers is a Hall of Fame level head coach, so he's been learning from a Hall of Fame level head coach now for a good portion of time. So he's earned it. He's earned the opportunity. I think that if you're the Rockets, you at least give him an interview. I think that he's earned that. And, if you feel like you want someone with head coaching experience, I get it. It's a totally logical, qualification that you want, or a requirement that you want for this job. But if you were going to go in a different direction, go for an inexperienced option, I think he would be at the top of the list. You've also seen Adrian Griffin, who's been at the top of a lot of head coach searches now for the last 4 years, or the last few years. So there are going to be a lot of good names out there. There always are. It's just a matter of, can they find the right guy? Can they find the right mix who can really connect with this young group that they have?
I mentioned earlier Stephen Silas being a scapegoat a bit in this whole situation, with the Rockets being as bad as they have been the past 3 seasons, the 3 seasons that he's been the head coach. But I feel like the focus, though, does have to shift now, or obviously shifts now, that they're going to have a new head coach and Stephen Silas is no longer going to be there. And Rafael Stone has been around now just as long, for essentially the same amount of time as Stephen Silas for the most part here. Where obviously he's going to still be around. At the very least for this draft and this offseason, he's going to shepherd all of that. So it's not a conversation about that in terms of when I ask the question where he stands, but overall, where does he stand? How much pressure is on the Rockets general manager to get this offseason right, whether it be, like, I guess the entire thing, free agency and the draft and all of it, and get this thing kind of in some sort of direction?
Well, I think he's on basically the clock. We could say this about Nick Caserio right now. The clock starts now, and the clock is now ticking on Rafael Stone. And, this is now it's his rebuild. I think that he's been fine as the Rockets GM. You can quibble with a thing here, a thing there. You can say they didn't get enough for James Harden. His options were limited. They were going to send Harden someplace that he wanted to go to. Maybe that helps them get Harden back because they did that. They didn't completely poison the relationship. You can say that, hey, maybe the Daniel Tice free agent signing was a bad decision. Well, I mean, they cleaned their hands of that pretty quickly. You can say they didn't get enough for PJ Tucker or Eric Gordon or Victor Oladipo, whatever. You can quibble with little things. But I think the big stuff so far, he's done fine on. The big stuff are the draft picks. And they took Jalen Green second overall. I think as we finish year 2, that's a good pick. Will there be better guys in that draft class? Maybe, but you're just looking to get a great player. And I think that Jalen Green has that in him. They went in, they got Alperen Şengün. That's a really good pick, for whatever, flaws Şengün might have, to get him with the 16th pick in the draft. And they traded a couple of protected picks in order to make that happen. Whatever. You take the talent appears to be there. The 2022 draft, the third pick, Jabari Smith Jr. is going to be a really good player. They got that one right. The 17th pick, Tari Eason, they got that one right. He's going to be a really good player. He's got a chance to make all rookie this season. That stuff he's done really well at. They've been able to use some of their other resources, whether it is finding Jayshawn Tate on the as a free agent in Australia. That turned out to be a really good move. The KJ Martin trade, that's a great pickup to get somebody like that with the 52nd pick in the draft. And if we do a redraft of that 2020 draft right now, KJ Martin is a top 10 pick easily. So he's done a good job there. They've cleaned up the cap. They have $60 million in cap space. That's a credit to Rafael Stone. Again, that's part of the Harden trade also. They could have taken back Ben Simmons. That obviously would have been a huge mistake, but they have all this cap space because they essentially just went for the draft picks. So has Rafael Stone been perfect? No, of course not. Nobody is in these jobs, but his main goal, once they decided to move on from Harden and in that era, was to acquire young talent. They've done that, and it was to clean up their cap sheet. They've done that as well. Now, the hard part, and this is where he's going to be judged, and this is where the clock really starts, you've got to start putting together a team that can actually win games. If they win 20-something games again next year, that's it. They're going to pull the cord on him in all likelihood. But if they can make incremental progress, then that's going to be the key for him. So he's in a good position because there is a lot of young talent on this roster. But now, can he turn that young talent into a basketball team that can win games? That ultimately will be where he's judged this time next year.
Yeah, it feels like, and stay with me here, it feels like he's gotten the math and science part of it done the math and science part of it pretty well so far in these 3 years, or at least decent. And I've talked before on the podcast about really loving what he's done in the middle of the first round with Alperen Şengün at 16. I know he traded up to get him, but to get him at 16 the year before, and then Tari Eason at 17, was it 17 or 18? 17. Getting Tari Eason at 17, this past year. I thought, I really liked what he did in the middle. And then, of course, Jalen Green. I feel like, I'm not going to try to make it seem like it was obvious to draft Jalen Green over over Mobley. I know you were a Mobley guy, and Mobley's been excellent. But I feel like he's done I don't want to call it easy, but just the formulaic, hey, draft the top players at benefit from being bad, draft the top players at the top of the draft, benefit from from the James Harden trade and all of that. And now this is the part that he's about to do now is the more artsy part, putting together, like you said, the hard part. To me, it's harder to figure out. And Daryl Morey is a really good general manager, but it was always there's always to be this challenge of figuring out which people can come together and make a team, aside from just talent, but how to actually make a team, aside from talent accumulation. They've done the math and science part of it is just finding out the talented players and accumulating them. And they've done that. So that part of it is cool for them. And I know that they're praying for Victor. To me, that's like the eraser. That changes everything. That forgives all sins, and we talked earlier about Silas. Was he relieved, or is he probably bitter or upset about it? And you're probably right. I'd probably side with you. I just, I thought it was interesting to think about as a headache that he's kind of had to deal with over the last few years. But my goodness, man, if they were to get one of these two players at the top of the draft, or really, there's a few players that they could get that could really change this team. I could just only imagine what that's going to feel like and kind of watch. But, I don't feel like with Stone, I think it's just like you just got to acknowledge that a general manager is on a different timeline than a coach. And that's in most sports. That's in pretty much all sports, I would say. that you've got to see progress. You've got to see certain things from a coach sooner than you do necessarily from a general manager. And also when they come in at the same time like these guys did, it's going to be, they're going to be the easier fall guy unless the coach is some like outsized personality that, that really is in charge. And that's not the case here. So, that's one thing I think about this. I was going to ask you though, do you think with general managers and like say like teams hiring a head coach like the Rockets are about to do now, and of course like the Texans just did, okay, they just hired D'Amico Ryans. We just mentioned Sam Cassell, bringing Houston nostalgia and all of that. But do you think like coaches that are getting hired now have to like have this sort of an acceptance of the involvement of a general manager? Because I know you read the story from the Athletic and all of the mention of, and we know about this. You've talked about this and reported some of this, but the involvement of Rafael Stone into somewhat of the day-to-day minutia of the team and some incidents of whether it's interrupting a film session or whatever it may be, or just kind of being hands-on and involved. Do you get the sense that that's something that's more unusual or something that coaching candidates are going to have to sort of just accept as part of the job going forward?
I don't know how many GMs are interrupting practices. I can't speak to that. It does not seem like it's normal. I don't think it's, I don't think it's, not normal for a GM to be at practice, but it's, some of the stuff has been a little seemingly abnormal. And you read the stuff today about it, it is what it is, but that's going to be on the head coach to set boundaries. And if you are a head coach and you don't want the GM interrupting practices or doing stuff like that, then you've got to set those ground rules right away. Now, if that keeps you from getting hired, well, then that's a problem, and that's a problem within the organization. So, Rafael Stone should be comfortable, and I get Rafael Stone wanting to be involved and wanting to be hands-on because ultimately this is his job, this is his livelihood, and he wants to make sure that it's going in the direction that he sees fit. But at the other, the other point is you hire a coach, let him coach. If you want to coach the team, then hire yourself to do that job. So I do think that it's fine to be hands-on, but you've got to understand the boundaries, and you've got to understand that, hey, I'm hiring this guy to do a job. I have to trust him and let him do that job. Otherwise, what's the point? And I do think that whoever takes this job is probably going to have to make sure that, hey, I need to have some free reign here, and I can't have you doing what it is reported that you were doing with the last guy.
Yeah, man, it's just interesting to me now that we're in sort of this information age, this analytics age, where it seems like, everyone probably feels like they know more than they ever have. And it's probably true. I would say like we can quantify things that we couldn't quantify before, or just didn't know how to quantify before. And I feel like the smarter a general manager or an executive thinks they are, the more prone they might feel to be involved in some of the day-to-day stuff. Because, back in the day, what did a general manager know that a coach didn't? But today, the general manager has access to information that a coach probably might not even always necessarily have time to digest. And so it's just an interesting. And so now the general manager or the executive or whoever it is feels like they know more than the coach because they're in an office somewhere or scouting or whatever they're doing, consuming all of this information while the coach is trying to coach. And I don't know. I'm not saying that's exactly what was going on with Stephen Silas or Rafael Stone. I'm just looking at the relationship dynamic of it, of the general manager who's the boss, but also has more information and knows more than they ever have. It feels like, and it obviously feels like this comfort level of sort of imposing a little bit. I also wonder, you talked about setting boundaries, if it's a matter of like hiring a coach who just, would set that boundary, off top, or like also hiring a coach who you wouldn't feel like you need to do that with. Like I wonder how much of it is that too, with Silas being a first-time head coach, and if they got a guy who's more experienced, if that would give Stone a reason to kind of lay back a little bit, or somebody with a pelts on the wall like Sam Cassell or something like that.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, at the end of the day, Stone was the one who hired Silas. So if you're going to hire him, you might as well let him do the job.
Fair enough. All right, man. Well, look, this is interesting, man. Let me, the season ended last time we talked. They had 2 games left. We talked about them finishing the season fairly strong, or at least seeing some signs of growth and some signs of maturity here and there from the team. What are some of your final thoughts on the season, man? It's another clunker, but now it's just at a point to where we're trying to see where they end up in this lottery, and obviously who they hire as head coach.
I do think the ending was good, and I think that's one thing that you can point to. I remember this time last year, everybody being so excited about the way they finished that season, and guys were putting up numbers, but the Rockets lost all those games. I mean, you look at it, they had this, Jalen Green and Porter and those guys, they were putting up big numbers. Once they sat Eric Gordon and Dennis Schroeder and Christian Wood, and they really just let the young guys take over, they went 0-7 during that stretch. You look this year, they played all their guys were healthy, and they won a bunch of games down the stretch. They won 4 out of their last 5. So I do think that they go into the offseason on a high note by the way that they close out the year. I think that can really help them moving forward. And I meant to look at this because I mentioned Scott Brooks in Oklahoma City. And it kind of reminds me, and I'm going to make these stupid parallels, but I'm going to do it's a dumb parallel, but I'm going to make it anyways. The Thunder in 2008, 2009, their first year in Oklahoma City, and they were terrible. They were terrible that season. That was Kevin Durant's first year, and it was Russell Westbrook's rookie year. And they fired PJ Carlesimo. Sorry, I'm trying to search for this while I talk.
So that would be Durant's second year then, right?
It was Durant's second year.
Yeah.
It was Russell Westbrook's first year. And that team finished the season 23-59. And this is after they started the year 1-16. They were at 1 point 2-24. But again, they finished the season strong. It set them up moving forward. They made another top 3 pick. They got James Harden. They made the playoffs the next year. Again, I am taking huge leaps right now with that.
It's our podcast, Adam. We can do whatever we want, man. This is H-Town Hoops. Go ahead, man.
That is that I can sell that to my fan base. I can sit here and say, you know what? We have 2 guys that we have 2 foundational pieces that we think can be all-stars in the future. We're going to make another pick, then we could get somebody who is just as foundational and has the same type of upside as the other 2, as Green and as Smith. We have all this cap space that we're going to spend. We're going to spend this money, and we're going to get better that way. So we have a chance to go into next season with a completely revitalized roster. All these young guys, all these 7 first-round picks that we have made in the last 2 years, they're going to get a whole summer of work, and they're going to be better when we go into next season. It's taken a huge leap, but I do think the Rockets can go into next season, and I think they will go into next season saying, and frankly, they need to go into next season saying, we can get into at least the play-in mix. Because first of all, they need to be good because their pick is controlled by Oklahoma City unless it falls into the top 4, which would, if you're finishing with the worst record in the league and you have a 50-50 chance, that's not a good thing. But I do think that they can sit here, and I'll be interested whenever we do hear from Rafael Stone, and if we hear from Tillman Fertitta in the next couple of days, I will be very interested to hear what they feel like is a timeline for them moving forward to get into the play-in playoff mix, because I don't think it is that far-fetched for them to be able to say, with all the picks that they've made, with all the money that they have off the books, with the picks that they will have, I think that you can sit there and honestly say we have a chance to at least be in contention for the play-in next year.
For sure, man. The good things I would say about the Rockets this year is that I do feel like every player that is either for sure a part of the core or potentially a part of the core, I feel like for the most part improved this year. I'll list them: Kevin Porter Jr., and Jalen Green and Jabari Smith. Let's just name them off top. Of course, as the number 2 and number 3 overall pick. Let's just start with him, Jabari Smith. Got better tremendously. The leap that he took from where he started to where he finished, I think is something that we've talked about before, but also something that the Rockets themselves have to feel really, really good about. Jalen Green, I thought, was somebody who had some struggles at times, but is definitely a much better player than he was when he was drafted almost 2 years ago now. And then Kevin Porter Jr., We've sung his praises plenty on this podcast, but someone who got better. Alperen Şengün, another one who's we talked about the from the beginning to the end, where things started and where things ended for him this season. And KJ Martin is another story. Tari Eason as a rookie. These are guys who I think got a lot better as the season went on and showed a lot of promise. And so I would say that's the positive thing. The other thing that I would say that I'm not sure is negative, but it's still just sort of a question or an incomplete, is that they've now drafted a player number 2 overall and number 3 overall. And you don't get to just say, hey, I'm drafting a guy who's going to be the best player on a championship team. Like, you don't get to just order that, from the draft. You draft the best player that you possibly can and see how things develop and see how things go. But as things have gone, I'm not there yet of feeling like or knowing that they have a guy on this team that could be the best player on a championship team. There's no way to know that yet. They're too young. They haven't played enough games. But they also haven't done anything yet that's so clear and obvious that dictates and says, hey, that guy could be the best player on a championship team. Like, I feel like people felt that way about Luka Doncic a year or two into his career, where you don't necessarily have that yet with these guys. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world that that's not the case. But that would be like one of my other like wait and sees. It's like, okay, Jalen Green took a step this year, became a more physical player, a better finisher, someone who goes to the free throw line a lot more, still needs to become more efficient, still needs to improve his shot. But what's the next step? What does his growth look like, in year 3, and beyond, obviously. But that's where I'm at, feeling like, hey, Rockets fans should be happy that they saw some growth, but also feel like there's an incomplete there, because it's not like it was so obviously they were as bad as they were as a team. It's not like you've seen anything that's so overwhelming that makes you feel like, yeah, that guy's gonna take us to the promised land, wherever we're trying to go. Which is also, I think, part of the Pray for Vic part 2 is where you feel like, hey, maybe that is that guy.
Yeah, for sure. And you can see it. I mean, and that's what's important, is that you can see the upside, you can see the future. And that's why I think that the last 5 games were important, because you could at least see that, hey, these guys, there's something there. Like, there's something brewing that could possibly turn into a great team moving forward. Now, we got a long way to go. I mean, you're coming off of 22 wins. You're not just going from 22 wins to 60 and contending for a title right away. But there's something there. There is talent there. And again, the cap space is so important, and this summer is so important for them to get that right. Because if you misspend the cap space, then you set yourself back, and now you're really relying on these young kids to take the leap, which I'm sure they believe that they can. And then moving forward, there is always Brooklyn to look for. And, they're not going to get anything out of that Brooklyn pick swap this year, but they have Brooklyn's 2024 pick. It doesn't seem like the Nets are going to fall off anytime soon. Just, we saw that team recover to make the playoffs this year, but at least they're kind of that possibility there. So all in all, I think they sit in a better spot today than they did this time last year. But now they move into a new phase, and now it's about, we have to actually start winning basketball games. We have to start putting wins together. We have to start playing the right way. If they can do that, then they've got a great opportunity here moving forward. But this is the hard part. The easy part is losing the games and compiling a bunch of talent. The hard part is melding that talent together and turning it into a winning basketball team.
All right, man, we got to do this again before they hire a coach, man. What you want to do? Off-season priorities?
Yeah, I mean, we should
lottery.
probably
Want to break down the play-in tournament? We can do whatever you want to do, baby. What you want to do?
We probably need to do some sort of a look back at this season. Remember, we did our awards at the All-Star break, or I think it was at the halfway point. We can maybe do that again. But yeah, right. Well, obviously we'll record before. I mean, the lottery is in 5-6 weeks. So we're going to have to record before that. Otherwise, the bosses get mad at us.
Yeah, I was kidding about the lottery thing, but also obviously the head coach's search is something that's going to be something that we'll keep our eye on and monitor, and follow the news, bring you the news as we get it. But definitely looking back at the season, there's plenty to look back on. You and I were there for it. Like I want to say this, since the season is over, and for whoever listens to this podcast, if you follow these games and watch these games the way that we do, God bless you. God bless you, because I don't know. I mean, that gives you some sort of dedication. You are some sort of dedicated. And also, if you don't watch all of the games and you don't follow every single moment from the Rockets and use this podcast as sort of your ability to do so, God bless you for that as well. We appreciate that. And we'll talk to you guys soon, man. We're going to record again, possibly later in the week as this off season comes up. Got the play-in coming up on Tuesday, so there'll be plenty of basketball. So for Adam Spolane, Brandon Scott, Austin Mendez, handling things behind the scenes. Until next time, y'all be good.